Hi again, everybody. I'm Jamie Allison, and this is the Big Idea, Big Moves podcast. This is the destination for high performers. We talk to people from different genres, just people doing really cool things in their space, find out a little bit about their journey, and see if we can translate some of those into our own lives as well. We talk to lots of athletes, CEOs, entrepreneurs. We've talked to scientists, just again, people doing really interesting things that we can hear a little bit about how they are achieving those things and maybe see how some of those fit into our own lives as well and hear some interesting stories. And today I have one of those. Just before we jump in, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that we have a relationship with Epitome Sportswear, and they are they're very similar to what we like to promote at BIBM as well. Is that they believe in whole life success, and whether it's feeling comfortable during a tough workout, if you're into that, it also means that it's maybe going to your son or daughter's game and just feeling comfortable doing that. And so they promote living life fully. But the other side of that is it's also important to give back to the communities they serve, and they're working to impact inequities in opportunity for girls and women in sport. And for that reason, a portion of their profits go directly to organizations and initiatives that support girls in sports. So check them out either through our Instagram profile. There's a discount code in there, or just go to Epitome Sportswear. That's EPITOME sportswear.com and check them out. So really happy to have Adele Nicoll with us today. She's a multi-time British shot put champion, Commonwealth Games athlete in that, and she's also been climbing the ranks in bobsleigh since earning her selection for the 2022 Olympic Winter Games in Beijing. And then now as a pilot, she's coming off a really successful season with her first World Cup silver medal as a pilot as well. And so not only a multi-sport athlete, but she's an entrepreneur. I know she has an online coaching academy. She's a mental health advocate and has recently actually even had an experience in a short film. So lots of really cool stuff going on in your life, Adele. So thanks very much for taking the time with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. I know I've been keeping an eye on your podcast for a while, and I've said to my agent, we must get on that. I know that we've briefly spoken before about it, and it was important that when I was home over the summer, I made some time to come on and chat to you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for doing that. And again, we know that you have a lot going on, and maybe that's maybe we'll just start there for a second because you have two. A lot of people would think those sports are quite different, but maybe there's some real kind of things that are quite transferable between the two. But what's that like going from training in a winter sport that is it may seem a lot different into kind of going back into your summer routines as well?
Like you said, I think most people would assume that they are very different from the outside, but they are essentially both power sports where you have to move a weight fast. Obviously, with the shot put, you're trying to throw it as far as possible.
Hmm.
And with the bobsleigh, you're trying to get the sled to move at the greatest velocity before you load into the sled, and then obviously continue to drive down the track. And the
Yeah,
better start you get, the better start you have for the full race, which obviously continues all the way down the track.
yeah,
So managing them both, I think, is more about compartmentalizing mentally with switching different roles, switching in and out of different seasons, different mindsets of where I'm at with each. I think physically they have a huge overlink where as long as I continue training all year round, I'm going to be somewhat in shape to compete in either of the sports.
yeah.
Um, and for me, it's just difficult coming back to the summer sport after being away for 7 months and
Yeah.
not having that contact time to do the repetitions
Hmm.
of the actual technique rather than like a strength or a physical fitness element. So yeah, it is difficult. It's very
Yeah.
difficult, but I'm managing it. I found a routine. I have a really good social network, and I think one of the most important things is having people around you that understand what your goals are and also supporting you to achieve those. Because if they were two completely different social support groups and they
Hmm.
didn't understand each other, then it would be very hard because I'd be fighting to please everybody. But I feel like the people around me know what my priorities are. I have goals, and Currently, I would say that 2026 Winter Olympics is the top of my
Hmm.
priority list.
Yeah.
And everyone keeps asking, what do I want to achieve in athletics before then? For me, because I've set that as my priority, I have no strict goals that I would deem, you know, my success on. So it's
Yeah.
not like, oh, if I don't achieve this, I'm unsuccessful. It's actually, okay, let's just continue to throw. Let's throw as far as you can, because that's always the goal.
Yeah.
And if you get some cool opportunities along the way to go and represent your country at internationals, then that is a huge bonus. But right now, the 2026 Winter Olympics is the main goal. And I would then like to shift focus to try and qualify for the 2028 Summer Games.
Hmm.
But I take everything in my stride. I think process goals are the way to get there. So I think I take it day by day. I'm currently in my athletic season, so it is about throwing right now, and then I will look to start my pre-season properly for the bobsleigh around August.
Yeah, yeah, and now you've thought that out really really well. Like we've had a couple of multi-sport, people trying to be in both Olympics and things like that over time, and that can be extremely difficult. I understand that, but you've really thought around how you want to kind of progress through that. Um,
Mm.
how did you get there? Maybe because that would be one thing that I think probably just isn't doesn't automatically come. I think you've obviously matured as an athlete to know what you can do during certain times and things like that. What's that journey been like for you a little bit, getting to the point where you have that headspace to be able to manage your goals?
So this is actually something I feel like I can talk on quite a bit because I'm
Hmm.
not coming from a place of I've always been this way, because I
Yeah,
haven't.
yeah,
And actually, one of my soft tissue therapists said the other day that he was asked a question last year, and it was, "Who's the most fascinating athlete you've ever worked with?" Now, this guy has worked with some top dogs in football, which is huge in the UK. Like
yeah,
soccer for
yeah,
over in America and North and Canada. I think you
yeah,
guys call it soccer too.
yeah. We call it soccer too, but
Yeah. So
yeah,
obviously your soccer is our football. So football's huge in the UK, and this therapist has worked with some of the nation's best footballers. And he said to me that he finally found his answer to the question, and it was me.
yeah,
And his reason for that was because he's worked with me since I was around 13, 14 years old.
hmm,
And I'm now 27, and he's seen all stages of my career in terms of who I am as an athlete, how I conduct myself, the decisions I make, things like that. So it has taken a really, really long time to get to this point, and I feel like sometimes you can't rush that process. You do have to go through certain experiences to actually build the skills to be able to make smart decisions.
yeah,
And like we're going to discuss in a bit, I think, talking about failure
yeah,
and how that doesn't mean that you've lost, because essentially the more mistakes you make, I personally believe, if you have the right attitude, you can use that to triumph and actually end up being far more successful than somebody that never makes any mistakes in their life. And I think, I'm not sure how it is over there, but the UK school system is very much it's different. It makes you think that making mistakes are bad. You almost
hmm,
like you want to strive to always get the right answer, always get the top grades, never make a mistake, because you feel stupid, you feel silly. But I think that's how we learn the most. And from my experience, being there and making wrong decisions and not prioritizing things, and
hmm,
not being the athlete that I am now, has made me so much more disciplined now, and has given me such a clear mindset on where I want to be. And essentially, the reason why I manage my schedule the way I do now is
hmm,
because I don't want to be average at a lots of things. I want to be really bloody good at something. And if and I know that I have the ability to be good at other things, but I want to be able to harness that so that I don't waste that. So it's
yeah,
like, okay, well, right now, this is what I'm trying to be really good at. I'll still do some other things, but I'm
hmm,
not going to try and spread myself too thinly. Like I said, my priority is going to the next Winter Olympic Games and essentially making British history. The best finish ever is an eighth place finish.
Hmm.
I want to be going to the 2026 Winter Olympics and hopefully the 2030 Winter Olympics and striving for podiums. So for me to be able to do that, I have to be making smart decisions, because essentially when you are a kid, you think you have so much time, and then time flies by and you're like,
Hmm.
okay, well, the Olympics comes around every 4 years. I don't want to waste my time. And once that time's gone, it's gone. So you have to make smart decisions.
Yeah. Now, going along with that, then, because you have been a multi-sport athlete, I think, most of your life, when you're young, there are a lot of people that that advocate for young kids to really have that focus on one sport, or really kind of spend the whole year kind of doing one sport very focused. And I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on that, considering how that shifted for you over time. Um, what's been beneficial for you doing all of that when you were younger, and then focusing later? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for multi-sport, and that doesn't mean that you have to share the time equally between the sports.
Hmm.
I think if you are good at one in particular and you have enjoyment in one, you should definitely focus on that one. But I don't think you should give up all opportunities, because you develop so many skills in different environments.
Hmm.
I believe I actually specialized a little bit too soon in the throwing, and then as soon as the bobsleigh came into play, it opened up my it like opened up my pathway for skill acquisition again. And because I had become so narrow in my um, training and my execution of skills, that I wasn't being challenged. I didn't have that stimulus, and bobsleigh provided me that challenge,
Yeah.
which I believe kind of ignited that fire again, which made me find my passion, my drive. I had lost that, and I try and wonder why that happened, and I wasn't doing so well. I think there was a lot of things going on in the decisions. Like accountability for me is huge. Okay, accountability is something that I would say can change your life. And for a long time, I wasn't accountable, and I was getting bad results, and I was probably blaming everything and everyone other than myself.
Hmm.
But I can look back now and say, yeah, you weren't making the right decisions actually for performance sport. But I think now the situation I'm in with doing both sports is that bobsleigh is not just making me a better athlete physically, which is having obviously a positive impact on the throwing, but it's making me a more resilient athlete, because bobsleigh is actually a very, very tough sport.
Yeah.
Not purely because of how rough it is when you go down, but also because of the graft it's taken to get to where I am, to secure funding,
Yeah.
to uh, work with a team, which is new, coming from an individual sport my whole life, working within a team. Um, you become lots of different roles. I'm sometimes Adele the mechanic, sometimes Adele the team
Yeah.
manager, Adele the athlete, Adele the driver, like the physical driver of a van around the world. Like
Hmm.
it's lots of different job roles, and I think it's making me hugely resilient, which is having a positive impact on my approach to training in athletics, but also my approach to uh, dealing with the results that wouldn't necessarily seem ideal, where some people have massive down times when they don't perform as they think they should. But I have a very good way now of depicting that and taking positives and processing. uh, I'm very realistic as well. I never ever sell myself a dream with things.
Yeah.
I believe that sometimes sets you up for disappointment. So I think there's nothing wrong with having huge goals. I have huge goals. Like that's not what I mean when I say I'm realistic. I say like I'm not going to tell you that tomorrow I am going to go and lift a world record lift, because I'm not going to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's it's something I think really helps with emotional management,
Mhm.
um, and that's key. I did my master's degree in psychology, so all of that stuff really interests me. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I see so many athletes say, I'm going to go and throw a PB tomorrow, or I'm going to go and win this tomorrow, or win that tomorrow," and I'm like, how about you just go and execute the best performance you can, and then see what happens. Because yes, you have to have process goals, but I think sometimes much, speaking too much can actually be you could be your own worst enemy.
Yeah, yeah. Really interesting that your thoughts around resilience with this too, and how it's kind of built that. Um, how much of that for you has been, you had that inside you already and have just maybe brought some of that out, or has it like it can resilience be taught, I guess, from your perspective, knowing you've actually done schooling in it too, and kind of what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think for successful performance as a whole, resilience is key. But a lot of the time, we are so inclined to put success down to natural ability, genetics, and talent. But we really forget the opportunities that we have along the way. And some of us, opportunities doesn't mean that you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, because I definitely wasn't. But having the ability to recognize that I have had opportunities along the way that other people might not have had, which has led me to where I am today, is huge. Because if we ignore the fact that, I don't know, my parents, for instance, like standard, I'd say very standard working middle class family, like
Mhm.
was just all about hard work and you'll achieve what you want in life, kind of thing.
Yeah,
But my parents were supportive, and my parents would take me to athletic competitions, and they would make sure I had the equipment I needed for training and things like that. So I'm very keen to recognize that, because I can guarantee there is hundreds of women out there that didn't have those opportunities growing up,
yeah,
and they would probably be fantastic athletes had they have had that. Um, so I think we often look at like what other people have got that what we haven't got, and we think, it's just that fairy tale. Oh, I didn't have what they had, but I still made it. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but you've also had opportunities that other people haven't had, and that there's so many talented people out there. But I don't necessarily believe in one being superior. So I think that a combination of training hours is hugely important, the opportunities you get along the way,
yeah,
alongside your talent and your natural ability in terms of like your genetics, um, they all play a huge part in being successful. And obviously, your opportunities that you get and the way that you respond to them, that is then individual, and that's up to you. And that's where you can build the resilience.
yeah, yeah. And to bump off of the opportunities part you talk about as well, a lot of people may not realize in sports like bobsleigh and some of those other sports, um, how important sponsorship and what you have to do yourself, and that's it's actually interesting to see how you juggle some of those things now, because there is a piece of that in bobsleigh is one of those where you have to spend a lot of time probably even going out and actively doing that stuff yourself. Like things like this, part of it
Yeah,
is to get your name out there and get people kind of connected in. So tell me what that's like, and let people know that, that's
yeah.
that's a real big part of what you have to do.
So yeah, bobsleigh is actually one of the prime examples of people having certain opportunities, which opens doors for you to be able to perform.
Mhm.
Financially, bobsleigh is one of the hardest sports to get involved in. And I am somebody that the attitude that I've built is, and probably like I said, coming from the family that I did and the way I was raised was, you want something, you go and get it, you go and work for it. So
Yeah.
when I'm told you can't do this unless you can buy a sled which costs £50,000,
Yep.
and I'm sat there thinking, right, well, I don't have £50,000. Um, how do I get £50,000? And that's where I think you have an opportunity there, and that's where you'll differentiate from people that can be elite and people that decide, you know what, that's too much work for me, and that's fine. And I think that's how you actually find out if it's really what you want, and what lifestyle you want. If you want to have certain things, like if you want to have your house and you want to have your kids and you want to have a family and you want to work your way up in your business and your corporate world, that is, do you know what, I see the appeal, because sometimes what I do is so stressful that I think maybe that would be nice. But I chose to make it work, you know, I chose to make it happen. And I decided to take it upon myself to find that £50,000. And that involves networking. It involves, it wasn't just sponsorship money that I bought that with. It was sponsorship money, but also my own money from going and doing public speaking. Like,
Yeah.
I deliver performance mindset workshops. So I go and deliver those at like sports awards evenings, schools, sports days, things like that. So a combination of that, along with the children's athletics academies that I run. So I run summer holiday camps, Easter camps,
Mhm.
things like that, which all kind of went into buying this bobsleigh. But on the other hand, you've got people there that don't need to do that because their parents can buy them a bobsleigh. And I have always been somebody that's like, do you know what? If you can do that and you've got parents that'll do that, like, do it, like, fair play. Like, I'm not bitter about that, because I'm like, that is such a privileged position to be in. Like, do it, capitalize on it. Get the bobsleigh, go and do the runs, but you have to be able to acknowledge that there are other people that are not in that situation and won't have those opportunities. And I'm somebody that, yes, I don't have that, and I don't have that luxury of having £50,000 spare to buy a bobsleigh, or my parents having that to buy it for me. But I'm also able to acknowledge that the position I am in is still more fortunate than some other people. So I believe that there's hundreds of people out there that would be fantastic sports people, but they just haven't had those opportunities.
Yeah. Well, and how is that now? Because I mean, you even just saying some of the things you have, and the fact that you probably have become, um, a real role model for whether it's young girls seeing what you do in those two different sports that, and maybe they didn't know a lot about, one of those sports or something before. What's that like for you, knowing that there's a bit of and I don't want to say responsibility because some people just don't pick that up, but you have a little bit because you really kind of advocate for some of those things as well. What's that like, knowing you're a role model for other people that are at that stage that are far enough back that that may impact both your sports later on?
Mm. I I love the position I'm in with being feeling like I'm making a difference, because that I don't think, like, not many people have done what I'm doing in terms of managing the two sports concurrently. A lot of
Mhm.
people have transferred, and transferable skills is awesome.
Yeah.
When you feel like you've finished with one sport, but you transfer into another. I think I love that. I love the idea of that. But not many have managed both concurrently, and that's something that I do believe I'm moving boundaries with, because dealing with separate federations, who have to open their eyes to the shared commitment that I have between both. I think I'm not only challenging myself there, but I'm challenging the people in the positions in the federation, because they have to accommodate somebody that is a dual sport athlete. And it's nice because essentially I am maybe putting in the groundwork, so that then those that come after me, now there's a pathway set up for them, and actually being a dual sports person is okay. And actually I grew up with people telling me, well, you can't do that in case you get injured, or you can't do that in case you get injured. And you know, that was the case when I was a little bit younger in athletics, because I was so scared of getting injured doing anything else. I just didn't do anything else. And I think that I was in a real dip of motivation, and I was worried that I was going to never get out of that. I was way too determined and resilient to quit, but
Yeah.
knew something wasn't right and needed something to change. And I was like, well, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So I was like, what can I do? And then I actually was toying with the idea of starting rugby, because I knew, like, uh, the physical attributes that I had would probably
Mhm.
work with rugby. I'd been asked to do some rugby, and just wasn't entirely sure. And then I got the opportunity to try bobsleigh, and I just thought, well, why not? Because I'm in a position where if I don't, I'm probably going to end up hating and resenting the sport, because it's closed so many opportunities for me. And the it was one of those things where it was like, oh, but if you go and do that, you might end up being kicked off the program for athletics, because if you're not focused or you don't
Hmm.
improve in this, then you can't be supported. And I actually at that point in my life was like, okay, fine, fine, because I was over that. I was over being constrained, like I was over being told to stay in a box and I should
Yeah.
conform to the size of that box. And like it was like putting something inside a box that couldn't jump, and it just kept hitting my head, kept hitting my head on the box. Like I couldn't get out. And I went and did bobsleigh, obviously, and came back, and I started throwing better. And at that point, then I felt I had more support from both sports
Yeah.
when I was
It's kind of that
doing
proven
well.
evidence piece. It
Yeah.
just showed that it is positive.
Yeah. And it was like in the initial phases, it was like, okay, I felt a little bit like I was gonna be counted out, because it was like, okay, she's gone to bobsleigh now. Like, no, I
Yeah.
haven't gone anywhere. Like, I'm still here. And I came back from the 2022 Winter Olympics, and qualified for the Commonwealth Games and won the Senior British Championships. And it was like, okay, do you believe me now? I think I can do this. And since then, like, the support's been fantastic,
Hmm.
which is why I feel like, yeah, I am making a positive change for the girls and boys that come after me who want to be dual sport athletes, because I'm showing that it's possible, and the federations are actually working really well together.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, a lot of that has some real planning components to it for you and for them, because you probably want to be able to show that you're able to kind of manage those two things. But maybe from a goal setting approach for that, like it sounds like you have real defined goals, but even just from a broader standpoint, not just your athletic goals, how do you kind of balance those things when you're still young? I'm sure you want to be able to have times where you can, do social things and have those connections while at the same time knowing there are intense parts of your training, I'm sure. Um,
Mm.
how do you set goals from a broad standpoint for yourself? Like, are you a write it all down kind of person, or is it you just know this in your head and you want to kind of move forward with it?
I'm definitely a write it down person. Do you know, my guilty pleasure is admin. I love a little bit of admin. I love writing things down. I love a spreadsheet. Um, yeah, whilst I was trying to make it, whilst I was doing my degree, trying to figure out money, figure out life, I was working as a finance administrator for university. I was doing lots of things that I believe actually have helped me now. Like, at the time I was probably sat at the desk thinking, what am I doing? How is this relevant to where I want to be? And now,
Mhm.
I fly through admin, and I feel like I have a real good structure to my life. And that's probably helped, being in those roles and where I am now. I feel like I manage my time really well. And yeah, taking a broader stance on my goals in life. It's strange, especially as a woman, you have to also plan like when you're going to have a family, because you're like,
Yeah,
okay, well, if my life is determined by every 4 years, that's because the Olympics.
yeah,
And I'm like, right, so if after 2030, I'll be 34, I'm like, yeah, okay, I think I could probably have a kid then. So I'm like, right,
yeah,
well, 2030, until 2030, like everything is about sport. Everything is about sport. There's obviously lots of different goals I have for every year between now and 2030. But in terms of like where I progress my own life outside of sport, I think after 2030 will probably be the time that I do that. I wouldn't say that that's when I'm going to retire from sport. I would just say that's when I would probably look to advance my current situation in life.
yeah.
Um, but I actually do have I have like a mind that wants to be stimulated. Like, I had a day off the other day and I was like, oh my God, this is so boring. I was like, what do people do? I was like, the sun's out and I don't want to go out drinking in the beer garden, or like, don't get me wrong, a few years ago is exactly what I would have been doing. But now I actually went to the park on my own, sat on a bench and had a brand new notebook, which is like the most satisfying feeling ever, and was writing down some business plans. And even though I don't have to start a business, I don't have to do any of that right now. I don't have to think of ways to necessarily grow my capital. I want to do that because I see so many athletes retiring and not having anything set up afterwards. And then they start, once they've retired, then they start panicking, and then they start desperately trying to recreate themselves. I never want to be in a position where I have to recreate myself. I'm like, I have worked so hard for the last 15, 15 years that that's been me creating myself. Now, as I have finished, my professional educational qualifications, I'm a professional sports person now. I'm like, okay, now is like the time where I continue to work hard. I reap the rewards from that, and along the way, continue to grow. I don't want to ever have to recreate myself. So if I can have numerous um, path if I can have numerous paths of
Hmm.
uh income, I guess that's the ideal for me, because if I can set up like the children's sports academies, the reason why I initially did that was because I was like, nothing's really going on in Welshpool, and that's where I'm from, and it's a very small town in mid Wales, um and there's no athletics club, which I'm establishing this year, which is fantastic. There's
Awesome.
never since I have been there's never been an athletics club in Welshpool, and that's something that I'm starting this year. And just to generate an interest in the sport that I hold so much passion for in my hometown was a huge thing for me. But eventually, I'd like to probably expand that into different cities. But I think that's something that comes with the more you win, the bigger the reputation gets and things like that. But I'm someone that's definitely always setting goals for myself, whether that's in sport or outside of sport.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you're looking at it as an evolution instead of just kind of one ends and the next one starts,
Yeah.
which is smart. So um, the one other one I did want to kind of check in as we kind of go is you talk a little bit about the mental piece of it, and I know the mental preparation part must be interesting for you, especially in those two sports. And I know a lot of people probably haven't experienced like maybe a lot of people have probably experienced shot putting, whether not at your level, obviously, but have maybe done that at some point. Maybe not as many in a bobsleigh and have went down a track before, which I know can be a very kind of it's a physically taxing thing, but probably a mentally taxing one, especially now that you're a pilot. How do you approach the mental preparation for your sport when it's something like that, because where your focus has to be so high, and how is that different for you?
Mm. Yeah, so I'm just thinking back to the race where we won that silver medal in
Hmm.
Lake Placid. So again, like I don't ever set parameters on what I want to achieve. So I always go into a race with confidence, knowing that I have the ability to compete against everybody there and that we're all on a fair playing field. I don't think it's healthy or beneficial in any way to be contemplating, oh, but they have better equipment than me, or but they have a better push start than me, or but they have more experience on this track than me. Thinking of those things is not going to help you in any which way.
Hmm.
So they don't even enter my mind. I have an absolute zero tolerance for that kind of I was gonna say that kind of BS. I don't have any
That's okay.
tolerance for that. So and I don't know whether that's a trained thing. That's something that I've always kind of worked on. But of course there are doubts. So for me in the bobsleigh race, there is two heats. So after heat one, we were sitting in third, and obviously at that point, then it's I've never been in that position before in a World Cup. My
Hmm.
highest position finish in the World Cup prior to that was a ninth place. So for me to be sat in third, it was very unfamiliar. So obviously it's so normal to have those waves of self doubt,
Hmm.
and I don't think you should see self doubt entering your mind as a weakness. I think that's the first mistake. People have some waves of self doubt, and they automatically think that's it, they're done. That they're going to lose, or they're not going to perform because they are doubting themselves, they're nervous, whatnot. I think we have to acknowledge that we're humans, we're not robots, so you will have those thoughts. And I think acknowledging them and reframing them and actually catching them is so much more important than blocking them out.
Hmm.
So if you because I had that, I was thinking, oh my God, Adele, you're in third place. It's so close in a bobsleigh race. You could honestly go from third to 10th.
Hmm.
Um, and you're thinking of all these things and you're thinking of everything that could go wrong. You're thinking of how much time you could lose when you skid on out of corner two and you hit out of corner. You're thinking how much time you could possibly lose. But it's a wave and you've got to recognize the wave and you've got to think, okay, all right, that's fine. I'm having these thoughts. But actually, if I catch it and I think, okay, I know what this is. This is just some silly self-doubt that's happening because I'm nervous and I'm unfamiliar with what's going on right now. But it doesn't determine what's about to happen. And the only thing that's going to determine what's about to happen is my reaction to everything that's going on around me. So if I realize that control that I have and I think, okay, well, actually, the thoughts that are in my head, I can control them because it's my head. So if that thought that's entering my head, I acknowledge it, I think, okay, well, you're not relevant to the outcome because I can actually decide not to listen to you. And then you open up space for more positive self-talk and you open up space for the confidence. And for me, I have in my notes, I have just statements, just random statements that along the years I've decided to write down in my notes so I can look over it and boost my self-confidence. I do things like that. I actually had to, I was aware that because I was nervous, I was going to be wasting my adrenaline. So I actually actively lay down on the floor, covered my head with a coat or a blanket, and listened to some really chill music because I realized listening to some hype music whilst my heart rate was probably flying through the roof wasn't going to be beneficial. So I think just you learn those things though. The higher level of competition that you compete in, you learn those things. But I think one of the biggest like pieces of advice I can give is not to block out self-doubt, to acknowledge it and catch it and think, okay, that's what that is. But it's okay because that doesn't determine who I am. That doesn't define the performance. I actually can decide whether to listen to this or not. And today I decide not to listen to it. Today I realize that nothing matters other than what happens in this second heat because I think people get caught up as well on, oh, but they've done better than me before, or they are way too experienced for me to beat them, and all these things that they stop themselves winning before they've even gotten the start line. For me, I was like, okay, well, we're going to go again, and all these things that I'm thinking in my head could also happen to everybody else. So why me? And I think that's what I think. I'm like, okay, well, everyone's in the same situation. So who's going to take control of it and who's going to come out on top? And I'm like, well, why not me? And genuinely, for one of the first times ever, and I don't know why I thought about it, I was stood on that block and I was like, what do you want? And this is going through my head, and you have 1 minute on the clock before you have
Hmm.
to slide down the bobsleigh track, and you're about to go, 80 mile an hour down a track, and you've got 20 corners to navigate, right? And it's extreme force on the bobsleigh corners. It's like a fighter jet.
Yeah.
I think it's something like, I think it's more than a fighter jet. Some corners have like 4 or 5 Gs. It's crazy. But in my head, I was like, what do you actually want? And then, it's amazing because if everyone was watching you, no one would have a clue what's going through your head. And in my head, I was like, well, I want an Olympic medal. That's what I want, obviously. Like, and
Hmm.
then I'm having this conversation with myself, and I'm like, well, then if you want an Olympic medal and you know that you're capable of winning an Olympic medal, now go and show them why you're capable of winning an Olympic medal. And that's genuinely the conversation I was having with myself before that race. And yeah, it was one of the most successful race, well, the most successful race I've ever had.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible just to know kind of what it's pretty cool that it actually is a relatively recent experience that you've had that
Yeah.
you could translate into everything moving forward, I'm sure too, right? So, um, so the one thing that we ask everybody, Adele, is that we try to get something to leave, and I'm sure people have taken even just from that conversation lots of really cool things that they can apply, and that's not just sporting. That's basically anything where you're kind of going at that why not me thing was I think pretty much applicable to anybody. But the other thing I know you talk a lot about is failure, and I know you mentioned it early on, but maybe that's the one thing that a lot of people listening, whether they're in sports or whether they're in business successes or whatever it happens to be, is that the thing that holds people back a lot of the time is seeing failure from a negative standpoint, and that you, I know, really have used that to help kind of propel things forward. So do you have a couple of tips on people that are trying to change their mindset around that? Do you have a couple of things that you'd suggest work for you, or that might be a way to approach it?
Yes, I think with failure, it should be seen as something that allows an opportunity for growth. I think if you can apply failure to a growth mindset, then you're on to a winner. And I always say, okay, well, it's actually lessons, not losses. That's how I think about it. And as long as you learn from what happened and you can apply it to your future decisions, then I just really wouldn't see it as a true failure. And the only true failure is if you give up, you can 100% guarantee it will never happen. But if you carry on, it might happen. And I would always rather take the risk of it might happen than it definitely won't. So for me, failure is definitely not a bad thing. And I'll give an example. You know, we were doing really, really well in training in the week of the European Championships in Segolda. I'd really enjoyed that track. I was actually helping one of my teammates how to drive a particular corner on that track. And in the European Champs, we had a fantastic start. We were really competitive on our start. And on that particular corner, I'd been teaching my teammate in that week. I had a crash. So I crashed in the European Championship and it felt awful. It felt like, yeah, it felt awful. And what I want to say to people is, you're not alone with that kind of feeling. That feeling is so normal when something you care about so much hasn't happened for you, or you feel like you failed. And God, I felt like such a failure. But at no point did I think, I'll never be good at this though, because that one performance doesn't define you. Even a few losses in a row doesn't define you. You have to have that innate self-efficacy to know that you have the ability to go and do better. And sometimes, right, like again, I was gonna say something, uh, stuff happens.
Yeah.
Stuff happens and it is what it is. And as long as you can come away from that and know, yeah, maybe I could do this differently next time, or how I'm going to take this forwards with me is I'm going to make sure that like I sleep a little bit more because maybe that it took my focus off today, or I'm going to like maybe not get too comfortable with things in future because maybe I relaxed a little bit too much. Or you have to just be very analytical as well. Don't just look at it as a failure. Yes, immediately you're going to have such really low emotions when you've lost something that you thought you wanted or you were going to have. But as long as you take that forwards and you can reflect, reflection is huge. I think the ability to be reflective in your own practice is key. And for me, we then, like I said, a few weeks later, then we went and won a silver medal at the World Cup. And at no point did I define myself by that one crash that we had that season. So if you give up and you allow a failure, or you allow a failure to stop you even trying, then you can guarantee it's not going to happen and you're never going to make it. But if you give it a go and you continue to keep getting up and giving it a go, it might happen and it might all pay off and it might be the best thing you ever do. So why would you want to give up that opportunity?
Yeah. Wow, great. Well, thanks very much, Adele. This has been a great conversation. I mean, really, really important stuff, but interesting as well. So thank you very much for that. And if people are trying to follow you and what's happening with you over the next little while, what are the best ways of doing that, Adele?
So I tend to update my LinkedIn and my Instagram the most. Um, I So I use Twitter, but not that much. So yeah, definitely Instagram is the best place to follow everything that I get up to. And luckily, my name is fairly unique, so there's not
Hmm.
lots of accounts called Adele Nicoll, and I was actually able to use my real name, not something like
Yeah.
bobsleigh girl 1 2 3000. You know. So yeah, it's just Adele Nicoll across all platforms, and I
Awesome.
tend to update my social media.
Great. And we'll make sure we put that in the show notes too. So if they haven't seen that, they can click right through and follow it. Great great stuff, and really really interesting, some of the things you're doing. We didn't talk about the fact that you actually have done some film stuff, which is pretty cool too. What's that like? Just before we go, what's that been like? So different, I guess. So.
Yeah, it's been awesome to be fair. I've had a few opportunities in the past. Like I did a reality TV
Hmm.
fitness challenge show, which was really cool. That's on BBC iPlayer.
Yep.
That's called Go Hard or Go Home. That was a really, really cool show. It was in the Dominican Republic, so some amazing challenges set in some beautiful places. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, most recently, I actually filmed a short film called The Score, and they casted me in that as I was a bodyguard, so that was pretty badass.
Yep.
And I have now made my acting debut. So yeah, lots of different avenues. Like I said, I'm not trying to recreate myself. I'm trying to grow.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great way to have kind of lots of different interests and out there. So again, follow that if you haven't already. If you haven't hit subscribe on the podcast, do that now because we have great people every week, just like Adele. But again, I know you're super busy, so really do appreciate taking the time today, Adele. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for talking to me.
All right, and everybody else, we'll talk again soon on Big Idea, Big Moves.